I used to believe that love was a silent promise, an unquestionable truth that could never be broken. The day of my wedding was the happiest day of my life. I looked at my husband and felt that I had found my home, not just in the literal sense, but in something deep, something that touched my soul. He was everything I ever wanted, or at least, that's what I thought. During the first few months, we lived in a bubble of happiness. The routine was simple, but the little things we shared made me believe that paradise was real. But like every fairy tale, reality has its way of invading, of seeping in, of shattering any sense of security you've built. Everything changed in a way I never imagined. Something that started with an unexpected visit. The police showed up at our door. I never thought that would happen to me, to my family, to the man I loved. They said something about him that froze my whole body. It couldn't be. It couldn't be that the man I knew was involved in something I couldn't understand. My mind tried to process, but the words didn't make sense. My heart raced, and I felt a sensation that I still can't describe. It was as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. Something inside me knew that from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same. But what did they say? What was my husband hiding? I don't know where to begin, but I know that after that day, I was never the same. And the story I'm about to tell will change everything you think about. Trust, love, and the secrets we carry. You'll understand why the truth sometimes is more terrifying than the lie. I will never forget that sound. The doorbell rang insistently, without warning, without any preparation for what was about to happen. I was in the kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee still in the air, when the noise pulled me out of the routine. Trance. I wasn't expecting anyone. It was just me and him that calm morning, like every other one. My husband was in the office, as he usually was. I walked to the door with my heart racing, feeling a pressure in my chest, as if something was wrong before I even opened it. When I opened the door, there were two police officers standing there. They were in uniform, with serious expressions, as if carrying the weight of difficult news. And as if it were a nightmare materializing right before me, they began to speak. The officer in front introduced himself, but his next words cut me like a sharp blade. "We need to talk about your husband." Just that. A simple sentence. Yet it was enough to make my world crumble. My heart stopped. My mind went blank. He was being investigated, accused of something I couldn't comprehend, something so far from the person I knew that it seemed impossible. "What's going on?" I managed to ask, even though I knew deep down that there was no turning back now. The officer seemed to weigh each word before speaking, as if carefully choosing the pieces of a story I didn't yet understand. He mentioned something about a fraud case, something involving money and forged documents, but nothing seemed to fit. How could it be him? The man I had spent so many months with? How did he manage to hide this from me? I tried to think of some clue, something I had missed, but all I could see were the walls of our home, the place where I never imagined something like this could happen. He never mentioned any problems, any issues with work or financial matters. We were fine. At least, I thought we were. The officer asked me to accompany them to the station to give a statement, and at that moment, all I could do was follow in a state of shock. Everything felt distant, like I was watching my own life in slow motion, unable to grasp what was happening. As I got ready to leave, a cold sensation took over me. I knew something terrible was behind that visit, but I didn't know what. The worst was yet to come. I was about to discover something that would change everything, and I wasn't ready for it. At the station, the silence was almost deafening. I sat waiting alone, trying to understand what I was doing there. My mind was racing, but nothing made sense. When they finally called me to the interview room, I could barely formulate a question, a reaction that could express the confusion I was feeling. That's when the officer revealed to me what was really happening. My husband's name was spoken in a cold, detached manner, as if he were just another name on a long list of people under investigation. He's being accused of large-scale financial manipulation, the officer said, looking me in the eyes. The impact was like an electric shock. The words echoed in my mind, but my body didn't react. I wanted to scream. I wanted to say this couldn't be true, that it was all a mistake, but I couldn't. What he was telling me seemed unreal, something that couldn't possibly be happening to the person I knew and loved. The officer went on, explaining more details I could barely process. But with each word, the image of my husband was transforming, changing, becoming someone I no longer recognized. The man I thought I knew was being accused of something so serious, so terrifying, that I didn't know if I could look at him the same way again. When I finally managed to speak, the words that came out of my mouth were just one question. How did he do this? The officer looked at me with a mix of understanding and impersonal professionalism, as if he were used to giving news like that. He didn't answer directly, but said something that stuck in my mind. Sometimes, people hide much more than you can imagine. And at that moment, I understood. I understood that, no matter how much I wanted to believe otherwise, something was wrong. Something was very wrong. I went back home, but I couldn't find peace. The man I loved was now a stranger to me, and the house that was ours now felt like an uncomfortable set. The officer's words, the impersonal tone, echoed in my mind with each step. What else was he hiding? What else didn't I know? What else had he done? As the day dragged on, anxiety consumed me. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew my life would never be the same. From that moment on, everything I believed about trust and love was being dismantled, piece by piece, and I didn't know if I'd ever be able to put it back together. The days after that visit were a blur of confusion and disbelief. I couldn't stop thinking about everything the police officer had said. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, cold and impersonal, and heard the words that froze me to the core. My husband was being investigated for something far beyond my understanding. At first, I tried to push the thoughts aside, to pretend it wasn't real. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this was no mistake. The man I thought I knew was hiding something big, something that would change everything. I couldn't stop asking myself how I hadn't seen it before. We had shared so much together, so many quiet, intimate moments. How could I not have noticed the cracks beneath the surface? How could I have been so blind? But the truth, it seemed, was that there were things about him, things about his life before we met, that I never knew. I tried to remember every conversation, every detail of our relationship, but nothing added up. I thought about the times he would come home late, the strange phone calls he'd taken private, but I had always dismissed them. I had always trusted him, and now, that trust was shattered beyond repair. I had to know more, even though I was terrified of what I might find. I decided to go to the one place where I thought I might find answers, the office. I needed to see, for myself, what was going on, to find any clue, any scrap of evidence that could explain this nightmare. It was the only way I could make sense of the chaos in my mind. When I arrived at his office, the first thing I noticed was the emptiness. There was an unfamiliar tension in the air, a stillness that made me feel like an intruder. His colleagues avoided my gaze, their faces tight, as if they knew something they weren't telling me. One of them, a woman I had met once at a work event, seemed uncomfortable. I approached her, trying to act casual, but the fear in my chest was suffocating. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, then glanced around before speaking in a low tone. "I don't know much, but I've heard things about your husband." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What things?" I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. She looked around again, as if checking for eavesdroppers, then leaned in. "He's been under investigation for months. They think he's involved in something big, something illegal." The breath caught in my throat. My heart started racing again, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I wanted to scream, to demand more answers, but I couldn't bring myself to. She quickly stepped back, as if she realized the gravity of what she had just said. "Please," she said softly, "I shouldn't be saying this. You need to be careful." And just like that, she walked away, leaving me standing there, completely frozen. The words echoed in my mind, but I couldn't piece them together. Something big, something illegal. What had my husband gotten himself into? And how had I been so unaware? The more I tried to make sense of it, the less I understood. The image of the man I had married, the man I had shared my life with, began to slip away, replaced by a stranger. The more I learned, the more my world tilted, as if everything I had known had been built on a foundation of lies. I went back home that night, but the walls of the house, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. I sat in the silence, trying to think, to process everything that had been happening. The police officer's words, the whispers from his colleagues, the strange behavior I had dismissed as nothing at all came rushing back at once. The house felt colder now, emptier. And the man I had married, I didn't know him anymore. The hardest part was the realization that, no matter how much I wanted to believe in him, the evidence was piling up. The truth was slipping through my fingers, and I didn't know if I could hold on any longer. The past was catching up with him, and I was left standing at the edge, watching it all unfold. The days turned into weeks, and the more I searched for answers, the further I seemed to drift away from the woman I once was. It felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, watching my life unravel in slow motion. Every moment that passed left me more unsettled, more uncertain of what I knew or believed. Every conversation I had, every place I went, everything seemed to carry a weight now, a weight I couldn't shake off. The house we had built together, the one I thought was a safe haven, began to feel like a prison. Every corner, every room seemed to whisper doubts, to echo the lies I had been living. It was hard to believe in anything anymore. I spent days at his office, talking to people who barely looked at me. I went through his things, searching for any sign of the man I thought I knew. Every drawer I opened, every piece of paper I found, felt like an intrusion, like I was digging too deep into a life that didn't belong to me. But I had to know. I couldn't just sit in the darkness of uncertainty any longer. I had to understand why this was happening. Why had he kept all of this from me? The man I had trusted, the one I had shared everything with, was hiding something so massive, so dangerous, that it threatened to tear apart everything we had built. I needed answers. But the more I uncovered, the more questions arose. I found a folder in his desk, tucked away in a corner where it almost seemed forgotten. It was full of documents, emails, and reports, things I wasn't meant to see, things I never thought I'd find. But there they were, in black and white, the evidence of his betrayal, the transactions, the names of people involved, everything, pointing to something bigger than I could have ever imagined. My head spun as I tried to piece it all together. He had been involved in things that went far beyond financial manipulation. There were names, dates, and details I couldn't even begin to understand. And yet, it was all there, laid out in front of me, undeniable. I sat there for hours, staring at the papers, my heart heavy with a grief I couldn't describe. This wasn't just about money. It was about everything we had built together, everything we had shared. And now, it was all slipping away. The person I thought I knew was no longer there. The love I had trusted was slowly being replaced by an emptiness that felt unbearable. I thought about all the moments we had shared, the quiet evenings, the promises we made to each other, and how they now felt like lies. How could I have been so blind? How could I have trusted someone so completely, only to have everything I believed in come crashing down? And yet, even as my heart shattered, I knew I had to keep going. I had to find the strength to face the truth, no matter how painful, because that was the only way I could ever move forward. It's hard to explain how I feel right now. I wish I could just close my eyes and wake up to a world where everything is the way it was before. But that's not going to happen. The reality is here, and it's something I have to face. If you're watching this, if you're listening to my story, then you understand how it feels to be trapped in a situation that you never saw coming. Maybe you're carrying a burden of your own. I know that this story isn't just mine. It's for anyone who's ever felt betrayed, who's ever had their world turned upside down by the one person they trusted the most. If you can, I ask you to subscribe to this channel. I know it's not easy to open up, but sometimes we need to share our stories to heal. And if you've ever felt the way I do, I'd be grateful to know you're not alone. Maybe, just maybe, we can help each other find the answers we're looking for. If you feel moved by this story, please leave a comment or share this with someone you think might need to hear it. I don't know what comes next for me, but I know that sharing this is part of my journey. And if you're with me, even just for this moment, it means more than I could ever. The moment to confront him finally arrived. I knew I couldn't live with this doubt, with this anguish eating away at me inside. I had to look him in the eyes, face him head on, and demand the truth. But at the same time, I knew it wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't just be a simple conversation. It was the end of everything we had built, and I didn't know if I could handle it. When I got home that night, the house was too quiet. He was there, sitting on the couch, so calm, so serene. It was as if nothing had changed, as if nothing had happened. But everything inside me was screaming. I didn't know how to start. I stared at him for a long moment before I could speak. "We need to talk," I finally said, my voice softer than I wanted it to be. He looked at me, confused, but still, he seemed too calm for the situation. He raised an eyebrow, probably expecting that I would talk about something trivial. But no, I wasn't going to let him get away with anything anymore. I know about the investigations, I said, my voice firmer now, feeling the weight of every word. He was silent for a moment, and the look he gave me was a mix of surprise and something I couldn't immediately identify. He didn't know what to say. I realized he was trying to find a way out of the situation, but it wouldn't be that easy. Not anymore. Why didn't you tell me? I continued, now more agitated. How could you hide this from me? How could you lie about all of this? He looked down, and I saw the pain, the fear in his eyes. I wanted to see in him the person I knew, but what I saw there was someone completely different. Someone desperately trying to hide something. He stood up and took a few steps to the side, as if trying to escape from me, as if he could run away from the truth. But there was nowhere left to run. I was trying to protect you, he finally said, his voice low, almost pleading. Protect? From what? I was starting to lose control, tears rising without my being able to stop them. He looked at me again, this time with an empty expression, with no answers. He wanted me to believe he did it out of love, out of some kindness. But what he did wasn't protection. He betrayed me. He betrayed me in such a deep way that I didn't know who to trust anymore. I didn't know if I wanted to hear any more of what he had to say. You don't understand, he began, but I interrupted him. No, you don't understand, I said, almost shouting. I trusted you, and now you're telling me it was all a lie, that it was all a game? He fell silent. There was nothing more to say. The truth was out, and the words we exchanged couldn't change what had been done. I didn't know if I could ever look at him the same way again. What we were, what we had been, seemed to crumble before me, and I was lost. I couldn't understand where he ended and where the lie began. At that moment, I felt as though I was disappearing, as if the person I loved had evaporated before my eyes, and all I could do was ask myself, how could he do this? My pain wasn't just the pain of betrayal, it was the pain of seeing the person I loved turn into a stranger, of watching everything we built disappear. I didn't know who he was anymore, nor who I was. All I knew was that we would never be the same again, ever. I couldn't stop thinking about the confrontation. It haunted me, replaying in my mind over and over again. His face, the way he looked at me, the words he said. It was as though I was living in two realities at once, the one I thought I knew, and the one that was now being slowly revealed to me, piece by piece. I couldn't make sense of it. How could he do this to me? How could he betray me, the person who loved him unconditionally? The days that followed were filled with silence, a silence that seemed to stretch on endlessly between us. We couldn't speak without the weight of everything hanging in the air. Every time I looked at him, I saw a stranger. Every time he looked at me, I saw guilt, shame, but no real remorse. He tried to explain himself, tried to justify his actions, but his words felt empty. The damage was done, and no words could undo what had been broken. I didn't know who he was anymore. I didn't know if I even cared to find out. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep pretending that things were normal when every day felt like I was suffocating. I had always believed in second chances, in redemption, but now, I wasn't sure if any of that even mattered. I wasn't sure if I could ever look at him the same way again. He had betrayed me, not just with his actions, but with his lies. And the hardest part was knowing that the person I had given my heart to was now a complete stranger. It felt like I was drowning, stuck in a situation I couldn't escape, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't breathe. I didn't know what to do or where to go from here. Every decision seemed impossible. Should I stay and try to rebuild what we had? Or should I walk away and start over? Even though every part of me wanted to run, I thought about leaving, about taking the escape I had been dreaming of for days, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the hope that things could still be fixed. Maybe it was the memories of the love we once shared. Or maybe it was the simple fear of being alone. But I knew that whatever choice I made, I couldn't continue like this. I had to face the truth, and in doing so, face the painful reality of what we had become. He tried to apologize, to beg for my forgiveness, but the words didn't reach me. I heard them, but they felt hollow. How could I forgive someone who had shattered my trust? How could I forgive someone who had broken me in ways I never thought possible? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that forgiveness wasn't what I needed. What I needed was peace. I needed to find a way to move forward, to rebuild my life, whether with him or without him. The hardest part was knowing that I had to make that decision alone. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I had already made up my mind, even if I wasn't ready to admit it yet. I wanted to believe in love, in the idea that people could change, that we could grow together. But the truth was, I didn't know if I had it in me to trust him again. And if I couldn't trust him, then what was left? The weight of that question was heavy on my heart, and I knew that the answer would define the rest of my life. The silence between us became unbearable. I could feel the weight of every unsaid word, the tension building up until it felt like a storm waiting to break. The days dragged on, and I could no longer ignore the truth. The person I once loved, the man I had married, was no longer someone I recognized. The memories of the life we had built together now felt like fragments of a dream, fading with each passing day. I had tried to hold on, tried to believe that somehow things could go back to the way they were, but the reality was too harsh. His actions had changed everything. They had changed me, and in the quiet moments when I was alone with my thoughts, I realized something. I was no longer the woman I had been before all of this. The pain, the betrayal, it had shaped me into someone different. Someone who no longer trusted the man who had promised to stand by her side forever. The truth was clear now. We couldn't go back. There was no returning to the way things had been. Our relationship, the life we had built, had been shattered beyond repair. And as much as it hurt to admit, I knew deep down that I had to let go. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about me, about finding a way to move forward, to heal, to rebuild. I had spent so much time clinging to the past, to the hope that things could somehow be fixed. But sometimes the hardest thing is letting go, and that's what I had to do. I had to walk away, not because I didn't love him, but because I loved myself too much to stay in a situation that was only hurting me. It was the hardest decision I had ever made. The emptiness in my chest was overwhelming, but I knew it was the right one. I couldn't keep holding on to something that was already gone. And as I made my final decision, as I walked away from the life I thought I knew, I felt a strange sense of clarity. A sense that even though the road ahead would be difficult, it was mine to walk. And I would walk it alone for now. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I had to take that first step, no matter how terrifying it seemed. Sometimes, the hardest part of healing is simply starting. If you've been moved by this story, if you've felt the pain, the heartbreak, and the strength to continue, I ask you to subscribe to this channel. These stories are more than just words, they're the voices of those who've lived through unimaginable pain and have found the courage to share their truth. By subscribing, you help keep these stories alive so that we can continue to share and preserve the memories of those who've suffered in silence. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Your voice matters. If you've ever experienced loss, betrayal, or pain, sharing your thoughts can be a step towards healing. We owe it to ourselves and to those who've suffered before us to keep their stories alive, to never forget. If you want to hear more stories like this, stories of heartbreak, of strength, and of resilience, I invite you to watch the other videos on this channel, especially the ones in the playlist. The link is in the description below or in the pinned comment. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. Together, we can continue to tell the stories that need to be heard.